You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
The ongoing war in Ukraine has exacted a devastating human and infrastructural toll, with estimates suggesting around 1 million casualties, encompassing both military personnel and civilians. Approximately 15% of Ukraine's fertile farmland has been rendered hazardous due to landmines. At least 210,000 buildings, including 106 hospitals, 109 religious sites, and 708 educational institutions, as of June 2024, alongside 70% of the nation's thermal energy generation. According to the World Bank, the projected cost for reconstruction is a staggering $524 billion, with entire cities needing to be rebuilt from the ground up. Amid this backdrop, recent diplomatic engagements have highlighted shifting dynamics. A notable meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky resulted in heightened tensions, as Trump and Vance reportedly pressured Zelensky to accept unfavorable peace terms, leading to a strained exchange. With all this in mind, is there any hope for the end of this war as President Trump hopes?
Since I pledged to swiftly end the war in Ukraine. So when I say end it, you can get that. I will have that settlement done within 24 hours.
The United States has made its stake in Ukraine clear, pouring over $113 billion by March 2024, military, humanitarian, and economic assistance. From advanced weaponry to emergency food supplies, the U.S. has positioned itself as Ukraine's strongest ally. But beneath the surface of this generosity, a broader strategy is at play. As Zbigniew Brzezinski famously said, without Ukraine, Russia is no longer a European power, it becomes an Asian one. The war has proved that point, with Russia's regional influence increasingly limited. The February 28, 2025 meeting between Trump, VP J.D. Vance, and Zelensky was meant to tie Trump more closely to Ukraine, both economically and diplomatically, but it likely had the opposite effect. Talks over a minerals deal, granting U.S. access to Ukraine's lithium, nickel, and cobalt, quickly turned hostile, with Trump accusing Zelensky of undermining global peace before canceling the agreement. Instead of strengthening ties, the meeting has further strained U.S.-Ukraine relations, leaving Zelensky empty-handed and raising doubts about continued American support. The U.S. has reaped major geopolitical gains from the Ukraine war, weakening Russia, disrupting EU-Russia energy ties, and stepping in as Europe's key energy supplier. For example, in January 2025, U.S. liquefied natural gas (LNG) exports reached 8.46 million metric tons, with approximately 86% directed to Europe. However, now Washington may see further investment as diminishing returns, pushing for a negotiated endgame. And by entering into negotiations with Russia, the United States also possibly aims to prevent a two-front conflict by encouraging Russia's neutrality or support in potential escalations with China. This strategy seeks to weaken Beijing's position by distancing it from Moscow. It also reinforces Trump's long-standing stance on NATO, and European security emphasizes equitable burden sharing among allies. In a 1990 interview with Playboy, Trump stated that as president, he would believe very strongly in extreme military strength. He wouldn't trust anyone. He wouldn't trust the Russians. He wouldn't trust our allies. He'd have a huge military arsenal, perfect it, understand it. Part of the problem is that we're defending some of the wealthiest countries in the world for nothing. We're being laughed at around the world. Trump's playbook is simple. Make Europe pay its fair share. And the thing is, despite their outward hatred of Trump, European leaders are stepping up, boosting defense budgets, and even forming coalitions to arm Ukraine, effectively doing his bidding. At a recent London summit, officials pushed plans to ramp up military aid, including air defense missiles. Europe is finally realizing that if the US steps back, they're on their own. Trump's mere hint at a Russian deal has jolted Europe into action, pushing them to shoulder more of Ukraine's reconstruction and their own defense. But let's be real, the US isn't leaving Europe anytime soon. Why? Money talks. In 2023, US direct investment in Europe hit a whopping $3.95 trillion, making up about 59% of all US foreign investments. Compare that to the Asia Pacific's $1.07 trillion, just 16% of the pie. Even U.S. investments in tiny Belgium outstrip those in massive India. With U.S. investments deeply embedded in Europe, the U.S. isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It seems Zelensky underestimated how the minerals deal could have anchored Kiev in a similar way. Having achieved its goals in Ukraine with limited resources, Trump now calls the war stupid and wants it to end. His long-term aim, forcing nations to pay for their own security via Ukraine's minerals or Europe's defense costs, has put the U.S. in a strong, enviable position. Russia's ambitions may have initially aimed to fully subjugate Ukraine, bringing it into its sphere by overthrowing the Zelensky government and replacing it with something like Russia's puppet governments in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Russia has a number of goals in Ukraine, like first and foremost being pushing Western military influence further away from its borders. As Russia has historically suffered invasions from its west along the flat North European plain, control over Ukraine affords Moscow strategic depth. Perhaps just as important to Russia, though, is Ukraine's human capital, boasting a skilled workforce in IT and engineering and military-industrial science. Kharkiv, home to the Malyshev factory and the Yuzhnoye Design Bureau, was a major hub for Russia's military-industrial complex, producing tanks like the T-34 and missile technology. Beyond human capital, Ukraine's agricultural resources, especially grain, are crucial. Russia, Ukraine, and Kazakhstan are pivotal players in the global grain market. In the 2020 to 2021 marketing year, these three nations collectively contributed just under 25% of global grain exports. Before the war, Ukraine was the world's sixth largest wheat exporter, with 20 million tons shipped in 2021, accounting for 10% of the global market. Russia led exports that year with 32.9 million tons, 18% of the global share. Several countries, particularly in Africa and the Middle East, heavily depend on these grain exports. For instance, in 2020, over 50% of 15 African countries' wheat imports originated from Ukraine and Russia. Notably, nations like Eritrea, Egypt, Benin, Sudan, Djibouti, and Tanzania sourced more than 70% of their wheat imports from these two countries. Egypt, one of the world's largest wheat importers, spends approximately 104 billion Egyptian pounds, which is about $2.1 billion annually on imports, relying heavily on Russian and Ukrainian wheat to meet its domestic demand. If Russia regained control over Ukraine while further integrating Belarus and Kazakhstan into its sphere, their combined export capacity would position them as a dominant bloc in the global grain market, being able to control the price of calories entire nations consume. However, Russia's initial plan to quickly conquer Ukraine collapsed in February 2022, forcing a shift in strategy. By April, with the Istanbul agreements, Russia moved from aiming for full subjugation to seeking Ukrainian neutrality. This was a far cry from its 2013 push under Yanukovych, when Russia tried to pull Ukraine into the Eurasian Union, the Moscow-controlled economic bloc. Now, instead of fully reintegrating Ukraine, Russia aims for a neutral buffer zone with cultural influence, while allowing Ukraine to maintain its independence. This shift reflects Moscow's recognition of the harsh realities on the ground and the need to secure its influence without further escalation. The Istanbul Agreements of 2022 emphasized Ukraine's neutrality and laid out clear restrictions on foreign military presence. Russia agreed to Ukraine's security being overseen by countries like the US, France, or Turkey, but only on the condition that Russia had veto power over any foreign military bases or large-scale drills. Now, discussions about deploying US or French peacekeepers in Ukraine have emerged, but this is a non-starter for Russia. Any foreign military presence, especially from NATO countries, would directly contradict the terms of the Istanbul Agreements and be viewed as a significant security threat by Russia. With an estimated 160,000 Russian soldiers killed, according to Mediazona, Russia has faced major setbacks but may still achieve its more modest goals. Moscow has demonstrated that Ukraine can't win the war with current US support, leading Trump to push for an end to the conflict. While Russia's grand ambitions appear out of reach, Putin may calculate that the losses are worth it if Ukraine is forced into neutrality and its military power constrained. As of the time of making this video, Russia retains a moderately good negotiating position vis-à-vis Ukraine. "You don't hold any cards." These were the words of Donald Trump to Zelensky during their recent press conference. But how true are they? Well, Ukraine's ultimate goal remains the restoration of its 1991 borders and security guarantees from Western countries. However, the failed Zaporizhzhia offensive highlights Ukraine's immense difficulty in regaining territory, despite its ability to make Russia pay dearly for every inch it advances. The Kursk offensive seems to have run out of steam, with Russia now reversing much of Ukraine's summer gains, leaving the battlefield increasingly stalemated. Since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022, Ukraine has faced significant economic and demographic challenges. The conflict led to a substantial contraction of Ukraine's economy, with the gross domestic product, GDP, falling by almost 30% in 2022. Demographically, the impact has been severe. The United Nations reported that Ukraine's population decreased by approximately 10 million since Russia's invasion, representing a quarter of its pre-war population. The refugee crisis has exacerbated a fertility crisis, which saw Ukraine's population decrease every year since independence. The longer the war goes on, the worse the demographic crisis, meaning the fewer troops Ukraine will have to fight Russia. Unfortunately for Ukraine, its bargaining power is severely limited, relying heavily on foreign aid. Ukraine has received significant financial support from both the United States and the European Union since the onset of the conflict. Ukraine's economic stability has also become increasingly reliant on foreign aid. Collectively, international donors have pledged around 267 billion euros in support to Ukraine, with approximately 49% directed towards military assistance, 44% for financial support, and 7% for humanitarian aid. The threat of the U.S. stopping aid to Ukraine, though, has seen European nations reassessing their defense postures amid evolving geopolitical dynamics. In 2023, defense spending across EU member states reached a record 279 billion euros, marking a 10% increase from the previous year and the 9th consecutive year of growth. Countries like Germany are contemplating significant boosts to their defense budgets, with discussions of allocations reaching up to 200 billion euros and potential needs extending to 400 billion euros, reflecting a robust commitment to enhancing military capabilities. Additionally, European NATO countries are planning to ramp up their defense budgets, potentially adding much more direct in-country readiness per euro. This shift aligns with former President Trump's long-standing call for European nations to take more responsibility for regional security, particularly concerning Ukraine. Trump has criticized European leaders for spending more on Russian oil and gas than on aid to Ukraine, emphasizing their lack of substantive support despite their social media expressions and promises. The U.S. has been Ukraine's biggest backer, but with aid now withdrawn at the time of this video is made, Europe faces pressure to step up. If U.S. support fades, can Europe fill the gap? Neither side is close to victory, and both may soon realize total success is out of reach. This could open the door for negotiations if the cost of war outweighs the gains. But the real question is whether Putin sees Trump's push for talks as a sign Ukraine is on the ropes. If he stalls, betting Kiev will crack under pressure, the war could drag on. Still, a deal where no one wins but all are forced to compromise may be the only way out.